Hello and welcome back to Cleared by the Kriegers, your guide to global freight. We're excited for another episode of Coffee and Containerships. We are here with your weekly dose of logistics news to have along with your daily dose of caffeine. I'm Kimberly Kilgore. I'm here with my co-host, Jerry Williams.
Hello.
And we're part of the client services team here at Krieger Worldwide. And our goal is to help our clients navigate the complex world of global logistics. Whether you're an experienced importer or just trying to keep up with the latest developments, we're here to bring you the insights that matter most to your business. In today's episode, we'll be covering a range of critical updates impacting the logistics industry, from the labor strikes threatening the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, and potentially the West Coast, to rising costs of air freight and key regulatory changes importers need to know. So let's get started with the big issue on everyone's radar, the state of negotiations with the ILA, or International Longshoremen's Association. Jerry, we talked a little bit about this last week. The current ongoing labor negotiations are over a contract that is set to expire at the end of the month, September 30th. And without a new contract signed, they could begin a strike as soon as October 1st. As of right now, most of the reporting we're seeing is indicating that a strike is imminent. And if they do strike, the ramifications are substantial on both the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. And there's rumors that it could also impact the West Coast.
Right. The ILA is reportedly asking for a 77% wage increase and a decrease in the investment of automation at the ports. So it's quite a lot to come to terms with.
Yeah, and not a lot of time. We're less than 2 weeks away. And just to give you guys a frame of reference here when we talk about substantial impacts and what could this mean, if you think of the ILA in itself, it's over 45,000 workers at these ports, 36 ports from Maine to Texas. So the impacts of any stoppage would be substantial. But now we're hearing whispers and rumors that the ILA could possibly also be sending workers to ports on the West Coast, like Port of LA, to set up a picket line. And historically, we know that if a picket line is put up at the West Coast by the ILA, the ILWU, or the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, would not cross that picket line. So you're talking about potential for the ports on both the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, and then the third, West Coast, all having work stoppages. So that's substantial. It's going to drive negotiations, hopefully, but the impact on your global supply chain, it's unavoidable at that point. So definitely a lot of the line, from what we know, the ILA has not returned to the negotiating table, which has kept things stalled. So we really need them to show back up to keep things moving along.
Kimberly, what would your best advice for importers be right now?
That's a good question. Hindsight is 2020. So I think ideally you would have already shifted some of your cargo. If you have extremely time sensitive cargo, we did see quite a big uptick in cargo moving to the West Coast, especially over the last 2 to 3 months. Cargo volume along the West Coast is up over 15% due to importers shifting their goods from the East Coast ports to the West Coast. If you did not shift your cargo, you just have to really think about those contingency plans, like we talked about last week. Do you have strong trucking partnerships ready to move your goods that do arrive ahead of the strike? Clear them off the port, get them where they need to go. Anticipate that there could be a surge in rates around that time to move your goods by rail or by truck. And really, the global logistics market is unpredictable and it is fragile in many ways. And so something like this can be so disruptive. And when we say, what do importers need to know? Importers need to know that even if they're not moving goods to the port of New York or to Savannah, and they think this isn't going to impact me, my goods are going to the port of LA, that's just not true. It will impact you because you're going to see the terminals at LA open up to take overflow from the East Coast to accommodate that cargo, get it into the United States, find ways to process that cargo. So, really, if a strike happens, anyone moving goods in or out of the US, you're going to be impacted. It's definitely something we're going to keep a close eye on, and we'll update you guys again next week as we get closer to that end date of September 30th.
All right, well, let's now turn our attention to an important regulatory issue. The Biden administration is considering changes to the de minimis exception. Currently, goods valued under $800 can enter the US duty free, a rule that has been widely exploited by companies like Shein and Temu to avoid tariffs.
And Jerry, just for our audience, to be clear, duty free means free of taxes, correct?
Correct. So tariffs are like taxes for imports coming into the United States.
So that means this program can be a really big cost savings for companies moving goods into the US.
Oh, yes, absolutely. De minimis is saving companies like Shein and Temu a lot of money they would otherwise pay in tariffs. The concern with that is that this practice gives these Chinese e commerce giants an unfair competitive edge over US businesses. Shein and Temu are able to offer low cost goods without facing the same regulatory and tariff burdens that US companies do. It's not just about competition, though. There are also safety concerns. Products entering the US under the de minimis exemption often bypass full safety checks, raising the risk of counterfeit or non compliant goods ending up in consumers' hands.
Ugh, that's scary.
Yeah. In response, the Biden administration is exploring ways to tighten this loophole. This could involve eliminating the exemption for certain goods, increasing inspections on low value shipments, or raising penalties for companies that exploit the rule. This could also escalate US China trade tensions, especially since those changes are directly aimed at curbing Chinese dominance in e commerce. Importers need to stay alert as any policy shifts could lead to higher costs or longer customs clearance times.
We've seen recently many of our clients have began reaching out to us for guidance since there were some announcements made last week regarding these tariff increases that could go into effect as soon as September 27th. And I know through our newsletter, we published the fact sheet that was put out and an information press release from the government that went into greater details on what items could be being impacted with those increases, but definitely could lead to a substantial cost increase depending on what products you're importing.
Absolutely. Changing the exemptions to de minimis, it's all part of a broader strategy to protect US manufacturers and ensure a more level playing field, but the implications for global trade are significant.
Yeah, especially when the majority of our audience are importers, right? So the bottom line is what's important when you're talking about big companies like Temu or Shein, they maybe have a little more margin for these tariff increases, but not every small business that we work for or even mid-sized company can afford seeing their tariff go from 0 to 25% on the goods that they're bringing in. So definitely something, if you have questions, reach out to your customs broker, seek further guidance. Like we said last week, being proactive it is so important in your supply chain. Anticipating these types of increases, it's going to help you plan better to absorb those costs or find ways, be strategic, other programs that are available to help you mitigate those rising costs. For example, Jerry, we just did one of our Krieger University webinars this week, and it went over Chapter 98 special classification provisions. And that's something that our border team is so well versed in. And there may be ways to reduce your tariffs. And that classification program is one of those ways if your products and the alterations you're making qualify. So again, something to reach out to your customs broker, find ways to really strategize about your supply chain, where those cost mitigations can come into play. We're definitely seeing a change in the way shippers are moving goods into the US, especially with the surge of e-commerce. Like Jerry, you mentioned with the de minimis and moving those low value goods duty free, we've seen a huge surge of e-commerce shipments using air shipments to move their goods, especially from the Asia Pacific region to the US. So just for frame of reference, if we look at September alone, In the first week of September, we saw a 3% increase compared to the previous week in the average price per kilo for air freight from the Asia Pacific region to the US. And then when you compare that to the month before, it's a 6.2% increase. But what's most shocking is that we've seen a 64% year over year increase in the average price per kilo for air freight being transported from the Asia Pacific region to the US. So when you look at this week compared to this week a year prior, it's up 64%. And that just shows you how dramatically the air cargo freight rate market has changed. And we're seeing that again, just that surge of e-commerce. We do see a little bit of a reduction in freight rate costs in ocean freight, but those air cargo rates are staying high, and air cargo rates are expected to remain high as peak volumes are still to come. Plus, we can expect to see ocean freight conversions to air freight if the ILA does go on strike. So definitely a lot to keep an eye on.
Kimberly, are there any updates to the Air Canada strikes?
Yes, we do have some good news. Air Canada has reached a tentative 4-year agreement with its pilots, which does effectively avoid a strike. Now, it is tentative, so yes, there is still some marginal risk of a strike, but we're feeling pretty positive moving forward that a strike has been avoided and that air cargo shipments will continue to move seamlessly out of Canada. So we're glad to see that extra hurdle avoided, definitely.
All right, well, lastly, let's talk about a key change in cargo reporting that every importer should be aware of. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has introduced stricter guidelines on cargo descriptions, particularly for e-commerce shipments. Terms like general, freight all kinds, and gifts are no longer acceptable. CBP is now requiring detailed, precise descriptions. Think stainless steel knives instead of kitchen supplies. CBP is doing this to ensure proper classification for tariffs. This is part of a larger effort to close loopholes that allow undervaluation or misclassification of goods, ensuring that tariffs are properly applied and safety regulations are followed. The bottom line is that vague descriptions won't cut it anymore. Be sure your paperwork is accurate and thorough to avoid delays or penalties.
Wow. I mean, I feel like we're seeing these types of restrictions. I don't even know if I would call it restrictions, but tighter enforcements and expectations on importers in multiple aspects from CBP. Definitely with the different regulations that are being proposed and passed right now. Again, I always kind of go back in my mind to the responsibility ultimately is bared by the importer, right? So we have to be sure that when you're importing goods into the US, you have a strong paper trail and that compliance is at the forefront of everything that you're doing. Ensuring that you have a compliance focused partner or partners is so key. I know here at Krieger, we take compliance seriously. We have compliance managers specifically for that reason. Jerry, is there a resource available for importers to go to be able to see these latest regulations that are published as they're published or find additional information to help them know what applies to them?
Yeah, absolutely. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection website is a great resource. If you go to their homepage, you click on trade, go to basic importing and exporting, and then go to their e-commerce section, they have a whole page of examples of unacceptable versus acceptable cargo descriptions. So they have the examples paired. So one example is the word animals. That is now an unacceptable cargo description. The importer needs to be specific and say poultry or horse. Another example of an unacceptable cargo description is appliances. To be acceptable, the exact appliance needs to be named, such as refrigerator or stove. Instead of just labeling something as an accessory, the cargo description needs to be specific, like sunglasses or hair elastics. So you can go to the CBP website and see all of those examples laid out for you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Ultimately, we know here at Krieger that the more you know, the more your supply chain will be benefited. So we take not only compliance seriously, but educating our clients Seriously, that's why we have these podcasts. It's also why we have Krieger University, which is our training program where we not only do internal training, but we offer training to the public and to our clients. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about any of our upcoming webinars. I think that about wraps up today's episode of Cleared by the Kriegers. From labor strikes to regulatory changes, these updates are vital for anyone in the logistics industry.
We hope you found this breakdown helpful. As always, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Krieger Worldwide.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Thanks.